starting the live stream. I'm seeing it load on the other page. And we're live on YouTube.
Excellent. And thank you, Will, for sharing your screen here. So if you are coming to us from YouTube, thanks for being here. We'll start in about 5 minutes or so. Emily, do you want to make Ray a co-host again?
Done.
Okay. Very good. We'll see if there's any early attendees. I'm going to just head over to YouTube to see if there's any streamers. I hope everyone has been enjoying the end of their summer. I've been reminded a few times that the summer is not over yet. We still have about 10 days or so. But let's see. One person is watching us on YouTube. So whoever you are, welcome, welcome. Oh, didn't mean that. And in case some of the other PSE leadership here were not aware, Katie Chamberlain is going to try to make it, but she has a few things in the way. And then Stefan can be here just for part of the meeting, but Ezra will be here the whole time. So some of the other updates. Welcome, welcome anyone who's joining us from YouTube. We'll start in about 2 minutes as our RPAG members trickle in. Hi there, Joel. Welcome, welcome.
Hi, Sophie.
How's
Thanks.
your how's your summer been?
Oh, it's been good.
Yeah,
Yeah, some good camping, hiking, seeing friends, getting outside.
great. I think most people in the Pacific Northwest, aside from those rare few who love rain, kind of live for these 4 months. So it sounds like you've gotten outside and enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we'll start in about a minute or two. We know that RPAG members will probably just be trickling in after their 9 a.m. meetings wrap up at 10.
I was going to say that given how dark and gray it's gotten looking out my window right here in the last half hour, it's like summer feels like past tense. Darn it.
I know, I know.
Seems short. It seems short.
Yeah, you kind of have the morning period. I know the first time I put on like boots in the fall, I'm like, how did my feet do this for all those months? I'm like used to sandals and all that. Hi there, Kate. Welcome, welcome. And Megan and Stefan. Kate, we're catching up on our summers, which might be a past tense thing or present tense thing, depending on your outlook today. How's it been?
My summer's been great. I just did a backpacking trip for my 30th birthday.
Oh, fun. Fun, fun, fun. Where'd you all go?
We did the Tahoe Rim Trail. So it's the backpacking trail that goes through the Sierras in a loop around the lake. Um, it was awesome. My feet look really bad now.
That's like, badge of honor there. How about everyone else? Welcome, Eliza and Stefan and Megan and Dan. Any good summer memories that we can hold on to here?
Sure, took my 4-year-old grandchildren on the train from Portland up to Seattle to watch a Mariners game. That was a ton of fun. That's a great memory. Their first pro baseball game. 4-year-old twins. They actually had a great time and didn't melt down once in the entire time we were there from 8 a.m. till 10 p.m. getting home. So it was
That
great.
is some grandfather, sparkle dust. There's some people on this call who also have twins and also have young kids, and I think maybe we're in disbelief right now. So well
That
done.
was
And
a
a
good,
train ride and a baseball
yeah,
game. That's 2 for 1.
yeah. They had a great time and so did we. So it was good.
Super
Wow.
impressed, Dan. Wow.
Yeah. Kara has her 8-year-old twin, so double the
That would not
age.
have been my experience, but I'm proud and in awe of you.
Well, their dad was along too, so he helped. But
That's good.
they were very excited. Just had a great time the whole time. So yeah, it
That's
was good.
fantastic.
Yeah, and the Mariners
Inspiration.
won, so bonus.
They did it for your grandkids. They knew they were there. Great. Well, good to see you, Megan, as well. Any summer memories? We're waiting maybe for John Ollis, Froy, and Summer here. So while we're catching up, anything else to report out on?
Well, first of all, I am a twin, so I was once one of those small children being dragged to baseball games and being rowdy on the train. Um, but I went to my brother's wedding in Jackson, Wyoming, and that was very fun. We went rafting on the Snake River just like a couple weeks ago, so that was definitely the highlight of my summer.
Wow, fantastic. That's congrats to your brother. Oh, and
Thank
it
you.
looks like, let me just update a name here. We have John Ollis. Moonlighting is you, Ezra. We had some link issues, but I think we sorted a lot of them out.
Hi.
Hi, the original Ezra Houseman. Initially, a number of us logged in as you, and those were two big shoes to fill. So we had to update our links here. But I think we're getting that straightened up. straighten out. And perhaps we're just waiting for Summer. Did you any word that maybe Summer wouldn't be joining us? I'm kind of looking to PSE staff here.
Was it Oscar Wilde who said, may as well be yourself? Everybody else is already taken.
If it wasn't him, it sounds a whole lot like him. I appreciate that a lot. Beautiful. Well, maybe we can slowly get started here and then have some remaining folks trickle in. But it's really nice to see you all after what felt like a little bit of a break. And it sounds like many of you enjoyed your summers. We have a 2-hour meeting here today, and we're looking forward to getting going. So Will, you can take us on to the next slide. So I think you all remember how webinars work, but we don't use the Q&A during this. We're really trying to replicate what an old-fashioned meeting felt like. If captions help you pay attention, we have those over there. For members of the public who are watching here during the public comment period, those last 10 minutes, you can raise your hand. And RPAG members, if you have a link or something like that, you can throw that in the chat and you can work on it that way. Go to the next slide, please. So hold on one second. Okay, there we go. So my request is that, we are constructive and courteous, and I'm going to help guide you all. This is streaming to YouTube, so explain that jargon. There's a feedback form and a new ISP email address that I will ask Emily to drop in the chat here. In case you have additional input after the fact. And like I said, we'll do public comment soon. Next slide. So our safety moment is around National Preparedness Month. So we know what disasters, the big one might be in our area. Keep a NOAA weather radio turned. Download the FEMA app, which I did prior to this call. Have information at ready.gov, and the PSE's outage map is a great resource during severe weather. So that's your safety moment. And go to the next slide. So the speakers today, it's your PSE leadership. It's going to be Philip talking as the Director of Resource Planning and Analytics, Kara as the Director of Clean Energy Strategy, Jennifer, who you know is the Manager of Operations and Gas Analysis, and Ray, who's the Manager of Communications Initiatives. So this is the group, and we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so our agenda for the day, we're going to start with Kara, who's kicking off the 2027 ISP. And then we'll turn to Jennifer, who's going to get a little bit more detailed about what that approach is going to look like. Ray will take us into a conversation about what engagement will look like, backed up by Philip. We'll take a break at 11. And at the end of that session with Ray and Philip, we're going to send a poll both to you all as RPAG members and also the observers who are with us today. That will inform the rest of the meeting. Come back after the break, talk more about clean energy, this clean energy survey that PSE is planning on launching here in the next couple months. Get your input on that. And then look at the 2027 schedule. See what the next couple months or years of this work might look like, and wrap with public comment as usual. So you can go on to the next slide here. So with that, Kara, I'm going to turn it to you for some introductory remarks.
Thanks, Sophie. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great, thank you. So before I jump into the slides, which I will in a second, just a quick process note. Jim Dennison, representing the interests of the Sierra Club, notified us late yesterday afternoon that unfortunately he can no longer participate in our RPAG meetings going forward. And I do just want to note that we'll certainly miss his contributions to this effort. Jim has asked Don Marsh to step in, and he is here today, I believe, as an alternate. We might be working on getting the link to him right now. But just in terms of next steps, we'll be reviewing the charter and our membership requirements as we consider Jim's request for Mr. Marsh to participate in future meetings on behalf of the Sierra Club, and we'll go through that over the next few weeks. So now moving on to the next slide, if you would. Going back to just kind of kicking off where we are as we pivot to this integrated system plan approach. And a little bit of this is a little bit of a refresher from our last conversation, since we've all had a lot of summer adventures since July, and just kind of level setting where we are. We did want to acknowledge upfront again the uncertainty we're working under right now as we embark on this ISP. As we've noted before, there are 2 initiatives on the November ballot that may impact this ISP work. One relates to the repeal of the Climate Commitment Act, and the other one relates to removing certain provisions of House Bill 1589. We certainly don't know what will happen with both of those ballot initiatives, of course. So for now, as we're setting up and thinking through the plans for this ISP, we really just want to make sure we're considering the range of possible outcomes, or the bookends, if you will. So just to give a couple examples of what we might mean by that, we just want to consider that full range. So on one end of the spectrum, we might have a scenario that has, a world where there's much higher levels of electrification, high adoption of EVs, perhaps there's lower gas use under that scenario. So that would be kind of one end. And on the other end of the spectrum, we might consider a scenario that assumes lower levels of electrification, maybe not as quick of EV adoption, and perhaps more gas use, and just trying to understand and make sure that we're thinking through a wide range of possible futures to study as part of this ISP. We plan to review some of those different conceptual draft scenarios with you at a future RPAG meeting, really just to get your input on our thinking on scenarios, some of the main assumptions in each of them, and so we can get that input and consider that before we get too far along in the analysis getting underway. And I've mentioned this before, we've mentioned this before, that rulemaking for this ISP will likely continue into July of next year. That also adds the uncertainty a bit. We really can't afford to wait until the rules are completed to start the analysis, just given the aggressive timeline we're on. So we're moving forward while building as much flexibility as we can, and really keeping our eyes on where that rulemaking conversation goes. One other thing I wanted to mention is we're calling this a 2027 ISP, but it's technically due on the first day of the year. So this is really a plan that gets developed and wrapped up by the end of 2026. And so when you look at the schedule working back from January 1, that means you're at a draft ISP somewhere in mid 2026, and the calendar just starts to look really crowded. So a big objective for our conversation with you today is to get a sense of how we prioritize our discussions and our time with you. And we really want to hear from you where you think we ought to focus some of those efforts. If you could go to the next slide, please. Again, just a few themes that we touched on before, just to reiterate, as we begin work on this ISP, we're building off the work we did with you over the last year plus on the 2025 IRP. We're also carrying over the feedback we received from you and the public. That was an important theme message we heard from you, and we agree. So on that note, we did prepare and send to the RPAG members via email a pretty comprehensive feedback report, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but we definitely want your review to make sure we've really captured the main themes that we felt we heard over that 2025 IRP process. I already mentioned the rulemaking that'll be happening. Lastly, we've been working to combine our separate IRP and CEIP, Clean Energy Implementation Plan websites into a single website. So yesterday, we launched the first edition of that update at cleanenergyplanpse.com. So we'll put the link in the chat to that so you can see. You'll see a page specifically for the RPAG, which is where all your materials will live. So hopefully that will be a good resource for all of you and for the public. That's our intent. Next slide, please. And then I mentioned we pulled together a feedback summary from what we heard in the 2025 IRP. It's about 7 pages long, so it's not a verbatim repeat of everything we got from the past feedback reports. We tried to be thoughtful in summarizing what we heard thematically by categories and the responses that we provided previously. We'd love you to take a look and make sure that the themes and messages you heard and that you offered to us are reflected there. So we're going to give a little more time for the feedback window for that through September 26th. So please do take a look at it, make sure we didn't miss anything. And that will be a document that we reference as we move through the ISP and reflect on that feedback as well as the new feedback we hear along the way. I think that might be it for my slides, Sophie, and I think we transition to Jen shortly, but of course, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah. let's take a moment and see if there's any questions as Kara reminded us where we left off a couple months ago. Questions or reactions here? Joel, please.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the mention of the rulemaking that's ongoing. Just wanted to highlight that something that folks in this room or anyone can participate in. We've got workshops coming up. I think the next one's next month. Likely some sort of initial draft rules to look at and absorb going into that workshop. So would encourage folks on this call to engage in that in whatever way you'd like to. And I'll drop the docket number in the chat so people can see where more information on the rulemaking is.
Great, thanks, Joel. I was going to ask about that docket number. Any other thoughts before we transition to Jennifer? All right, Jennifer, you can go to the next slide, please, Will, and Jennifer can kick us off talking about the ISP approach in a little bit more detail. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, good morning. So much like Kara, I'm going to kind of refresh on what we discussed back in July, hopefully add a bit more context and frame up how we've been thinking about this over the last several months. And that should lend well into the engagement conversations and give you good context for potential topics and where the engagement could really go. So the next slide. This is a high-level overview of the integrated system planning process and how we're thinking about it. So we're thinking about starting on the left-hand side and looking at the customer and PSEs, clean energy goals and priorities, ensuring that we're incorporating the Clean Energy Transformation Act requirements and our decarbonization goals. Then as we move to the right to the larger circle, you can see that the customer program needs are in the center. And what we're really excited about for this integrated system planning process is to focus on the customer, the end use customer, and their needs and long-term objective and goals. And then we look at building the integrated system plan around that. So those customer program needs would influence the gas and electric demand forecast, which would then identify our clean energy needs and our PSE infrastructure needs, as well as our regional transmission. All of this work would be completed within the engagement of our advisory boards, interested parties, and the public. The RPAG today is a big piece of that engagement process, as well as equity. The 4 tenets are on this slide here. We're incorporating equity across all aspects of the integrated system plan. And the output of the integrated system plan would really be that integrated customer strategy, the equitable distribution of benefits and reduction of burdens across all aspects of the plan, as well as specific actions to achieve those clean energy goals and targets. Next slide. So this slide is also familiar to you. It's taking that high level overview and really breaking it down into more of a process flow. Again, starting in the top left with the scenarios and goal development, we're looking at our clean energy targets, identifying customer partnership opportunities. We have a number of compliance, regulatory, and safety requirements that we have to incorporate as a utility. That would then feed into the scenario considerations. Kara briefly mentioned looking at economic factors, potential policies, such as the different initiatives on the ballot, risks, and demand forecast potential variations. This then flows into customer strategies. So much like the prior slide, again, really focusing on that customer plan up front and the strategies. Moving this piece up here is one of the main differences between an integrated resource plan and an integrated system plan that we're developing. There's a few reasons for it. One, it really enables us to focus on the customer plans up front. It also alleviates some timeline constraints that we have within the modeling framework. The system planning process specifically needs to look at the load forecast after the demand side resources are removed. And this becomes a problem in the timeline and modeling framework to have that continue to be an output of the integrated resource plan modeling process. So moving it up front alleviates that. It also alleviates some concerns that we heard from the RPAG back in July regarding alignment of inputs and assumptions across the different planning frameworks to ensure that our plans that are coming out of each various group are consistent and meet the same needs and requirements. That would then, the customer strategy and plans would then be taken off of the demand forecast. This includes gas and electric. I guess everywhere I'm talking gas and electric. And then as we move into the analysis framework, this is looking at the big planning buckets. So we have electric system distribution planning on the top. We'd be evaluating 10-year investment needs by scenarios, incorporating non-wire alternatives as part of that, and also looking at the hosting capacity map. There's a big tie between distributed energy resources and the distribution planning system, and evaluating the benefits that DERs can have on the distribution system itself. We also would run an analysis in gas system, transmission distribution, gas integrity, looking at those same 10-year investment needs by scenario, as well as non-pipe alternatives. We'd be evaluating transmission not only within PSE service territory, but outside of PSE service territory to help align to those clean energy generation needs. And then on the bottom, you can see the electric and gas resource planning. This is typically where this forum has been focused. And you can see how much scope we're really adding when we think about an ISP compared to an IRP. We used to just be on that bottom box, and so now we're really expanding it. There's a couple highlights referenced here, but as you know, as RPAG members, there's a lot more to a resource plan, but there's resource adequacy considerations, utility scale generation resources, and then the customer strategies are a big part of that portfolio selection process. When we move to the next column, for the preferred alternative selection, we're looking at optimizing across these different portfolios into a cohesive plan. And across them, we'll be considering the equitable distributive benefits and reduction of burdens. So again, each part of this ISP will be evaluating equity. PSE has been working on including equity in our planning processes for the last couple of years across all of these areas. And so this isn't necessarily new. We're continuing to evolve how we look at equity. And what's really nice about the ISP is it allows us to look at that collectively across all the planning frameworks to ensure we're optimizing appropriately. Will also help us align to our clean energy goals and targets and our greenhouse gas emissions. We have our geographic electric and gas system supply investments. So this is highlighting what I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier about this ability to align the distribution energy resources with that system planning opportunity based on the heat maps, as well as some targeted electrification opportunities that we may find as we dig into this on the gas and electric system. There's utility scale generation investments. The outputs of the resource plan will identify volumes potentially of generation that would be needed to hit our various targets. Also needs for resource adequacy requirements regarding capacity on the electric system and long haul transmission investments that may be warranted to supply that generation. And then the last part of the process is the system plan itself. We're looking at the customer plan, a certificate of necessity, if that is something that comes out of this work, a clean energy action plan. So this is for gas and electric, an ISP submittal, and then the customer impacts, kind of just really bringing that full picture of the customer end use through the end of the plan. Not only is it important to consider where we think customers will go over time, but we also think it's important to consider how this plan shapes out and what it means for a customer's bill at the end of the day, so that they have a frame of reference for these different scenarios and outputs. External engagement, again, would happen across the board as well. You can see that on the bottom. Any questions?
Yeah, Jen, let's give you a moment to catch your breath. This is a real content-rich slide here, a lot of good information. And so let's just turn to the group before we move along. Any reactions or questions to what Jen has shared? Yeah, Joel, go ahead.
Thanks. So one question I had was about the customer strategies and the alternative customer strategies box here. It sounds like this is there's several things that are new here from previous processes, but this seems like a significant departure from the way previous IRPs have been done, where the model sort of decides how much conservation, demand response, DERs look cost effective. It sounds to me like what you're saying is that these would be chosen prior to running that portfolio model. Am I understanding that right? And could you go into how PSC sees that as a way to reach a lowest reasonable cost portfolio in the end?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So for this first ISP, I don't know that it's a long-term solution per se. As Kara mentioned, we're really looking at leveraging a lot of the 25 integrated resource planning work, because we've had a lot of engagement with this form specifically on how we pulled that together. So the idea, based on this tight timeline that she was iterating, we do have some timeline slides later to help articulate this a bit better for you, because it's probably, you don't live in it like I do. But the near term, we really do need to set up what that customer strategy is to incorporate into that analysis column in the center so that they can all run at the same time. And to do that, we're proposing leveraging the 25 integrated resource plan models, to have that the CPA run through those models to produce an output, but then to have a bit more time really diving in on the customer aspect of those plans, right? Traditionally, it's all happening rather quickly, and we move forward with the least cost plan. The bill itself has some language regarding some energy efficiency targets and other things to consider. So we're going to run those models once they're and a reference case is provided. We'll run those, look at the least cost plan, and then look at the different scenarios that we develop and we discuss with this group in a few months or so, to evaluate what that volume of conservation would be and what other distributed energy resources we identify. And then those would be set and then taken off the updated load forecast for that analysis column. Does that kind of help? And we were planning to talk more about that at a later thing, but go ahead. So.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm hoping to get some more clarity on that down the line. It sounds like this is sort of like based on kind of 2025 analysis. These would be sort of put in as a must take in the 27 ISP. And I guess maybe more of this will become clear as we go forward. We don't need to dwell on it on this slide necessarily, but appreciate you taking a first swing at that.
Yeah, no, that's a good interpretation. And then I would say, as we update the 27 models, right, for this analysis column here, we'll be looking at the updated CPA for that 27 analysis and essentially benchmarking, referencing, are there significant changes between the two? Does it warrant a need to redo this? Those sort of questions will be asked and validated, but that's our initial plan to ensure that we can move forward with the timeline.
And so speaking of timeline, I know that Jen will come back to the timeline at the end of the meeting. So anything kind of else on the process? All right. Well, Jen, I know you have another slide to kind of talk about building off of previous work, so we can go there and then wrap. Oh, Philip, did you want to say anything? I just saw your hand real quick before we move on.
Oh, well, I was just gonna add. I know, right? This is gonna take a long time to evolve. We've been working on this stuff furiously, and nobody else really has been, right, as their full-time job. But I think, Joel, a couple things to think about is we've been thinking about. Yeah, we're probably gonna have to do a little more detailed of what Jen described. We'll have to do. We're planning on doing a kind of a model run on the electric side, probably on the gas side as well, using the CPA kind of the way we always have, to say, here's what's cost effective. Now, if the 1589, assuming the ballot initiative doesn't pass, I don't even know what the ballot initiative does off the top of my head anymore. We've been so busy with everything on the electric conservation targets and all that. But if we just sort of go with 1589 stays the way it is, yeah, we're supposed to do 2% of load in conservation if it's commercially feasible. And so that analysis will be able to tell us, oh, well, it may not be cost effective. Is it feasible? Or it may show actually more than 2% is cost effective and may be feasible. You know what I mean? So that'll help that way. But I think there's also a lot that we can do or that the customer strategies teams can do with things like avoided costs. Right? I mean, the avoided cost is what we use to actually design the programs and the targets and all that, and so there's probably a lot that can be done in that with that information to develop some of these, to explore some of these different alternatives, right? So some things will probably go through as questions into the whole complete modeling process, where you're going to look at the full meal deal of energy supply and delivery planning simultaneously with that forced assumption on customer strategies. And there's some things that we'll be able to make decisions on kind of in that other bubble with the customer strategies, kind of using avoided costs. So it's kind of working through those details, but they won't be flying blind. We'll have that kind of look to say just what's least cost. And then that also creates a lot of the avoided cost kind of information that will further be of use to that team. Does that kind of make sense, Joel?
I think that helps. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for chiming in. It looks like Lauren that gave her a thought. Hi there, Lauren. Welcome.
Hi, Sophie. And thanks, Jennifer, for that overview. I missed the beginning of it, but I feel like having looked at this slide and had numerous conversations with your team, I just want to reiterate, I think we're encouraged by the direction this is going in. There's a lot of things on this slide that are priorities for us. I'm happy to see the hosting capacity map represented, non-wires alternatives, non-pipes alternatives. Happy to see the integration of DER and DR opportunities, particularly on a geographic basis. I think that will be really interesting to see what that looks like in alignment with the targeted electrification opportunities. So I just want to thank the team. I feel like this covers the landscape of a lot of things that have been priorities for NWEC and what we would like to see in an ISP, and we're looking forward to working with you all. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Lauren, and for kind of your reflections on how this incorporates some of what you've spoken to in the past. Anything else? All right, Jen, how about you go to the next slide and then we can wrap with some more questions.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so just adding a little bit more context to the conversation regarding leveraging of the 2025 Integrated Resource Plan process that we've been working with this group on for the last year or so. The analysis for the 2025, we updated the demand forecast. We were planning to leverage the targeted electrification strategy that's being filed in January of 25, incorporating BCP targets as we usually do, as well as resource adequacy. When we think about the integrated system plan, we're doing all of those things and more. We're incorporating all of those different aspects, as well as including the analysis of the gas and electric transmission and distribution across those scenarios. So really expanding the technical scope of the document and analysis. We're considering equitable distribution of benefits across all aspects of the ISP. And as I mentioned, PSE has been working really hard on including equity across all these forms the last couple of years. And so this really brings everything together in a nice format. We're also really focused on that customer plan analysis up front, as we were just discussing. Good questions and clarification, Joel, on how we're going to do that, and more to come. There's also a big component within the bill language itself on the estimated average rate impacts. So we're excited to bring that full picture of a customer impact as it relates to maybe an average residential bill. We're also excited about the opportunity to consolidate some regulatory filing processes. So this will allow us to consolidate the CEIP and the CEAP, as well as the IRP, into one ISP document.
Nice. Thanks, Jen. Other questions or comments? Right. Well, thanks, Jen, for going into a little bit more detail for us now. On one of your slides, you said the engagement bar kind of traversed the whole process here. And we have Ray Outlaw to give us a little bit more detail about what the thinking is. So Ray, want to take us away?
Yeah, thank you, Sophie. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, great.
Awesome. Okay, next slide, please. So as we start to think about the ISP, we recognize we need to update our engagement objectives. And the first thing we thought about is continuing that two-track approach that we developed last year with advisory groups. That includes the RPAG, as well as the EAG and others, and our public webinars. That proved really successful over the last year, and we intend to continue that model, but with a mindset toward continuous improvement. And one of the ways we want to continue improvement is to work with you to identify what key areas we should focus on and the level of engagement that we should discuss at. And so that's a big part of today's discussion. When we get a few more slides in, we'll have a couple of interactive exercises for you to help us with that. We also want to create space and engage a broader audience. This is something we started talking about more than a year ago, and it's still true today. And so we're looking at ways to create space for everyone, even those that may not have a ton of interest or time for system planning. And we're looking at leveraging some existing tools within PSE. And I'll talk about those in a moment. And lastly, we want to, again, continue to improve. So we are working to improve our transparency and what our feedback looks like, how we track feedback, how that feedback influences what we do. The summary that Kara mentioned earlier is an example of that first effort, and we really would appreciate it if you could take some time to take a look at that document for us and share any feedback that you might have. I think Kara mentioned, but I'll say it again, we've extended the normal feedback window by a week to give you a little bit more space and time, because that's a fairly lengthy document. Next slide, please. So how are we updating the RPAG approach? Thanks to Sophie and her team. She reached out to a bunch of you earlier this year to get your feedback on how things are going and what we could do differently. I will note that through July, we expect to have a regular frequency of meetings. That exact frequency will be determined, and we'll talk about those topics and how much we need to fit into the calendar here in a bit. But the emphasis in the next year up to July 2025 will be on our assumptions and inputs and modeling efforts before a pencil down date in the middle of next year. And these are all things that are fundamental to the analysis. We also heard you, and we'll aim to avoid the lunch hour and have shorter meetings where possible, although, sorry, I can't promise we will always have short meetings. There's certainly some topics that may make more sense for us to dive into for an extended period of time rather than try to break them up over shorter meetings. The other thing we're going to try to do is poll you for each RPAG meeting. In the past, we had tried to pick a date just based on what we knew about calendars, but we're going to use Doodle to try to maximize attendance going forward. Things that we aren't planning to change much, we'll still send our materials in advance and post them online. We'll collect feedback at least 1 week before and 1 week after each meeting, and we'll continue to use those feedback reports and meeting summaries to catalog the feedback and how PSE is responding. Next slide, please.
Oh, Ray, can we pause for a question from Lauren before we move on?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ray. Just very quickly. So the materials, I just want to clarify, the materials will be posted online for public review, like to the public. It's on your public website before the RPAG meeting. Okay, great.
Correct. We post them the same day that they're emailed to the RPAG members on the website.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, so engagement strategy through July 2025. And if you're wondering why that date, we committed to filing a public engagement plan by October 31st of this year that covers the time period from actually last month until July 1st, 2025, which is the end of the commission rulemaking. We feel like that would be a good time to pause and reset and adjust our approach based on the outcome of that rulemaking exercise. So that's where our focus is now, although we can't completely ignore the work that needs to happen after July 2025. We plan to engage the advisory groups in a range of topics during that time, and we have a slide in a minute that goes over what those topics look like. And quite frankly, we have a lot of them and need to prioritize the best and most important topics for discussion in this group, discussion with the EAG, who we'll talk to next week. And then we also intend to use emails and memos as a way to memorialize decisions or topics or things that we either don't require feedback or we don't have a lot of time for engagement on. On the public side, we are working with our internal teams to leverage what we term internally as Ask an Expert platform. That platform has been used primarily to engage customers in new programs and services like the bill discount rate program or demand response programs. But they have designed and created a pretty great marketing opportunity to engage a broader customer base and sometimes have 200 to 300 people join their webinars. I'm not going to promise that the integrated system plan will generate 300 interested parties, but we're going to try. And then lastly, and we'll talk about this towards the end of the presentation today, we plan to launch a survey in Q4 of this year to really learn about customer priorities around decision making, their expectations for the clean energy transformation and cost assumptions. And we'll talk a little bit more about that today. I want your help in brainstorming what that survey might look like. Next slide, please. All right, Philip, I'm going to turn this over to Philip. He's going to talk us through all of these topics and help us understand what they are and how we fit them into a calendar before we ask you to take a poll on which of these topics you think are most important to discuss. So, Philip?
Can I just break in before Philip goes? We have a hand from
Please.
Ezra and a question in the chat. So go ahead, Ezra.
I just wanted to note that in the past, in the IRP process, I think you really have tried to solicit input from the RPAG and maybe also from members of the public on topics that we really feel need to be covered. And when you say some things are going to be covered in a memo, makes me a little nervous. So to make sure there's still going to be some give and take and opportunity for us to ask for a maybe more focus or detail in areas that that seem to be important beyond just what PSE decides.
Thank you, Ezra. That's exactly the point of this next slide. And I will say today we're going to solicit your feedback. It won't be the last time we ask this question, though. I think as we get into planning beyond July of next year, we'll need to revisit the topics and the priorities for the RPAG and the EAG, et cetera.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ezra. And in the chat, Don was asking if PSE will release a draft of the ISP public engagement plan before the published date. Thoughts on that, Ray?
Great question. I'm going to say we will respond later. I don't know that we have time in the calendar to release a draft and provide, reasonable time for feedback and then incorporating feedback. So I'll take that back and we'll discuss and respond.
Great. So is that a feedback report item we should flag?
Yes, please.
Great. So please do that. Okay, Joel.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, on the previous slide, I think it was these, I just wanted to clarify these Ask an Expert style webinars. So I think in the past, you've done these public track kind of IRP webinars that were meant to kind of inform and collect feedback from the public, the IRP process, be a venue for their feedback and questions. I just want to make sure that these Ask an Expert style webinars, are those meant to be the next iteration of those public webinars, or is this more just a new engagement strategy to answer questions about specific topics that are interesting to your customers?
Great question, Joel. I would say that we see these as kind of an evolution of the public webinars that we did over the last year with an enhanced effort to, advertise the events on social media platforms, for example, and also to market them as a more public friendly topic. In the last year, we really had kind of we brought a topic to the RPAG and then we brought a version of that topic to the public. And we kind of marched through that sequence. We are thinking about it a little bit differently so that we can frame the public conversations in a way that are relevant to the RPAG topics, but not necessarily step for step the same topic. The public, obviously, very different audience. We feel like we need to bring a more public friendly version of these conversations to them. Otherwise, it's increasingly hard to get folks to participate.
Okay. Yeah, appreciate that. I think in the previous feedback that staff provided. We mentioned that there was one well-attended and very engaging demand response. I think it was public webinar that seemed well received by attendees, but also seemed a little bit disconnected from like sort of the development of an IRP, which might be drier than what most people are interested in engaging in. But I think we still, expect to have place for people who are interested in engaging in the IRP process to do that, even if it's not as widely attended as others. But I appreciate the clarification. I just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you, Joel.
Thanks for that, Joel. I'm looking around the room and I'm looking at the chat. I'm not seeing any other hands or notes. So Philip, do you want to walk us through slide 19?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sophie. And I think the question from Ezra, or Ezra's concerns and Joel's comments there, would just perfectly set this up. And what we're trying to do here is identify. Identify what's going to be important to you, right? What do you want to have meetings on? In the past with the IRP process, from going in the Wayback Machine, it was pretty easy. There's a technical information that's required at different steps, and it was a pretty easy way to just look and say, hey, here we're going to have advisory group meetings on each of these topics based on the timeline. We've certainly received feedback in the past that, maybe that's not exactly the way that the advisory group would like to engage. And I think also, like Ray brought up, that there's different needs. I think there's a different needs for what we need in an advisory group, what y'all want to share with us in an advisory group setting, and then the public, right, is a different set of wants and needs, and how do we address all of that? So with this slide, I wasn't, I just wanted to lay out a bunch of different alternatives. This isn't really meant to be an exclusive list of alternatives, and some of them are pretty high level. But what we didn't want to do was kind of present, well, here's the schedule and topics that we think we should discuss. That feels a little bit too much like what we used to do. I certainly have some ideas, and there's some things that I'm sure are going to be on the list that we kind of feel like we really have to cover. But rather than laying that out and telling you what I think, just wanted to really kind of use this to kind of seed your thinking. Hopefully you all had a chance to review the slides in advance and think about this a little bit. But that's really the point here, is to try and make sure that we get an idea from you all what you think the best use of your time would be, because there's a lot, right? There's a lot. I'm sure there's more information than we would be able to cover in sets of meetings, because everybody's got limited time. So just want to make sure that we understand what your concerns or interests might be. And so I'm not sure if it's helpful to pause at this moment and say, is there something missing here? Is there something missing here and all that? But this is really just an initial sort of brain dump to say, here's a whole bunch of things that we came up with. What are y'all thinking? Yeah.
Philip, do we want to give folks a chance to do the survey and then we can talk about what's missing? Or just because let me see if I recall, there's not an other category here, but actually let's everyone go through the process of filling out this survey on the RPAG side, and that might kind of spark you to say, like, I wish we could talk about X, Y, or Z. So in the chat, Emily just posted a survey link for RPAG members. So this is just for if you're an RPAG member. And then Emily will separately, at the request of PSE, post a different link for any of the observers who are here today. So there's 7 of you, mighty 7 of you, and you'll have a chance to fill this out. And so I guess we can cue the Jeopardy music for just give everyone, it's 10:48. let's give everyone until 11:02. So 4 whole minutes to fill out these polls, and then we can come back, talk about what's missing, and PSE will use the results. So any issues with, oh, we have a hand from Megan. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I just realized that this entire list is not available as options in the survey. Like, it looks like customer programs isn't an option in the survey. Electric resource planning are just some that I caught. So I just wanted to flag that.
It's a good point. Ray, can I turn to you about that mismatch?
Sophie, there shouldn't be a mismatch. So it may be that the slide evolved before the survey was finalized. I'm double checking now.
I'm looking.
I think I'm seeing the same thing.
Yeah.
The customer programs is missing from the so I'm seeing customer programs is not there. I'm sorry about that. That could be on my end in drafting the survey. So if there is something that is not on this list, just drop it in the chat and we'll count it as that result.
Hey, Sophie, can I offer a suggestion?
Oh,
I
yeah.
think we're supposed to take a break at the top of the hour.
Yes, we are.
I wonder, could we take a moment and correct the survey while folks take a break and think about the topics on the screen? Then we could come back and folks can finish the survey. It wouldn't take long to update the form.
No, not at all. We can certainly do that. So Emily, I'm going to ask you just delete the links that you just put in the chat there. And then we'll have a one-to-one lineup in a minute. So how about this? We should take a little bit of an early break, you're thinking, Ray, and then come back. Okay. So let us do that. Our break was supposed to be 5 minutes. So let's come back at 10:55 and you'll have some fresh surveys to use. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you in 5 minutes. All right, everyone, we'll slowly come on back. You can turn on your camera so that I know that you're back. That will be helpful. Excellent. I see Joel and Eliza. Ezra and Stefan are back. Dan is back. I think I recall Megan saying she had to step out for a moment, but let's just see if there's Megan. Don's back. Let's see about Lauren. Okay, we let's say we have a pretty critical mass. So, you are here. Sorry about the, Lauren's here. I saw the chat there. Okay. So Emily, while you're working on your end, I'm going to just put for RPAG members, here is the updated survey. Apologies for that mismatch. Good catch. With the different, excuse me, with the different options. And then in a moment, Emily will paste it for the observers. So now we can cue the fake Jeopardy music. And Ray, I see you coming off of mute.
Yeah, Sophie, I just want to add, so we recognize we're asking you impossible questions here. The first one is pick the 3 most important topics to you, and then the next one, perhaps even harder, pick the one that you would take off the list. I just want to be clear, taking it off the list doesn't mean we won't be talking about it in the ISP. It just means we might not have time for a 2-hour meeting on it with the RPAG. So that's the difference. We're not talking about, will this be in the ISP or not, or will it be a focus in the ISP or not? We're just talking about, what do we have time to get in front of you in the coming weeks, months, and partial years?
Yeah. There is some quote about being an editor and how taking things away is much harder than adding them, and it feels like that as well. So now everyone can have their 5 minutes. So let's do 11:55. Let's have for you to have this thoughtful. Okay, Dan, let's hear from you first.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just, there's, terms require definition. And so I'm curious about the implications of some of these terms. Maybe we can have a conversation after the 5-minute period. Because, for instance, what does electrification mean in the context of the ISP? And that's going to define whether I think that's an interesting thing for me to participate in. So just as an FYI, I don't need the definition now. It's probably important that we define some of these terms and what you all are thinking when you put them out there.
Dan, it seems like it makes sense to define things maybe now before you click any buttons. So it can be a little bit of a simultaneous thing. Philip, do you want to just jump in with some definitions on electrification? And Dan, if there's any other sort of buzzwords here that we feel like we need to unpack?
Sure. So I'll tell you what I thought when I put it on the list. But also I want you to think about what it might mean for you, because really the purpose of this is not to say, hey, everybody, here's what I think we ought to talk about, is to say, here's a bunch of things we could talk about. What I meant by that was, I'm assuming that we will be looking at different electrification pathways. That certainly includes some transportation with different EV forecasts. Also probably means a range of different trajectories on converting gas end uses to electric end uses, right? So that's kind of specifically what I was thinking about there. Like I think Kara mentioned at the very beginning, it's one thing to say, well, there's a high electrification as part of a scenario and a low electrification of gas loads in another scenario. It's another thing to say exactly what do those words mean, right? And what is high and what is low and what's some things in the middle that we ought to be examining. So like that's what I kind of had in mind with that one, Dan. And if you have a different idea of what that could mean, that'd be great to have that conversation. And so I don't know if there's any others, if it's helpful, if anybody wants to ask a question about what we mean by some of these, maybe I'll defer to you, Sophie. Maybe this would be a fine time to have those kind of questions.
Yeah, I think that's okay. And I see Katie's hand is raised as well. Go ahead, Katie.
Hi, I'm sorry I was just able to join recently, but and I apologize if this has already been covered, but similar to Dan's question, I think in order to kind of do this poll, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about these topics because it seems that some of these are subtopics of others. Like I imagine within electric resource planning, we would be talking about portfolio sensitivities and the preferred resource plan. So I guess I'm just a little unsure of how I would rank those given that some of these seem like subtopics.
Go ahead.
I was just turning to you, Philip, to see if you felt like I don't want to step on your toes, but if it's okay for you to just kind of talk through some of these a little bit more.
Sure. And like I think I agree with you, Katie, that some of these are smaller topics of larger bullets. And so, first, like, you don't have to be too stressed out that the words on the survey don't perfectly match what you had in mind. The point of the survey isn't to document and say, bang, 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 this is what we're going to do because this is how many votes it had. It's really to kind of stimulate the dialogue about what might be important. So, other things on electric resource planning that might be there, that could be the details of the modeling. How do we do the modeling? It could be, resource adequacy. We've had in the IRP process leading up here, where we kind of last left the resource adequacy heroes was we're going to be looking at the implications of shifting over to a forecast of the RAP needs rather than continue with our own region, assessment based on our own analysis, E3's analysis. So those are the kinds of things that would all kind of fit under electric resource planning. So, to the extent that you're not seeing something that's on the list, if this list helps you identify something that you think ought to be there, it's probably, I think the directions, we'll go ahead and put it in the chat. Because again, I think the purpose here is to kind of stimulate the discussion so that we can put together, make sure that we're focusing on the things that y'all would like us to focus on.
Does that help a little bit? We have time to do some unpacking if there's anything else that people want to explore verbally before committing to a click. Any other terms, or Dan, you were right to bring this up early on. Yeah, what else is coming to mind for you, Dan?
I just want to say it's just really hard to pick 3. I probably don't need the whole list, but I could maybe use 6, right? So anyway, just I'll do my best. I appreciate the effort there.
Great. Any other questions before we take a moment to just fill this out? I see 4 of you have filled it out so far, but other questions on terms? Okay. Let me just double check the chat here, making sure there's no questions in the chat. Okay, so let's give everyone about 3 more minutes and we'll still kind of be on time with the meeting, 11:08. And I'll wait to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sure, no one else. 7. A minimum of 7 responses for the RPAG members who are here. My counting is right. So we'll see y'all at let's do 11:09. All right, I'm getting the sense that you all were the kids in school who finished your tests early. I see the 7 responses have come in from at least the RPAG members. And so we're going to 8 responses there. Okay, we're gonna share this over with PSE, let them take a moment to digest it, and then that'll kind of influence the conversation that's going to proceed from here. So thank you all for doing the live survey. I know that it asks a lot of you to be on the spot. Let's see. All right, so I think in terms of surveys, we might want to just continue our conversation about surveys. I know that Ray's is talking about a much more scientifically significant survey that they're going to come out with in a little bit. And while Ray's doing that talking, we'll be sure to communicate the results to PSE so it can inform the rest of the conversation. So Will, can I ask you to move on to the next slides here? Here we go, next one. All right, Ray, back to you.
Thanks, Sophie. And just to reiterate, we're going to come back to those survey responses later in today's meeting. So we're not abandoning that topic completely. As I mentioned earlier today, we're planning to field a statistical survey later this year. And the research we hope will inform elements of resource planning as well as our outreach and communication strategies. It will be available in multiple languages. And so we wanted to talk to you about the format of that survey today and get some ideas from you. Next slide, please. So the first thing I'll say is we know we need to keep it short. I've been involved in a lot of surveys. I'm guessing you all have taken a few, if not contributed to them in other ways before. And we know that the longer the survey, the lower the response rate. So keep it short. We hope to identify customer preferences for or at least understand better what customer preferences are for different types of resources. For example, how do people feel about batteries, nuclear, electrification in general, and cost, really try to better understand customers' willingness to pay for clean energy programs and upgrades. Also around their needs for economic support and programs and obstacles they may face to a smooth, equitable transition to clean and reliable energy. And we also know that surveys are not always the best method to get feedback from customers, but they do allow us to hear from a lot of customers in a really powerful way. One way that we address some of the limitations of surveys is by oversampling specific customer segments. So in this case, we want statistically relevant data from all of our customers, but we also want to dive deeper into our named communities. And so on the list here are some subsegments within named communities. So rural communities, BIPOC adults, low-income households, tribal communities, military communities, and seniors, as well as small and medium-sized businesses. We plan to oversample those groups so that we can understand how are their opinions and preferences different from the larger PSE customer base as a whole. And we have some experience surveying these customer segments from a CCAP, our Customer Education and Awareness Program team, that they did last year to start to get a baseline understanding for how our customers in named communities engage with, understand, or even are aware of the clean energy transformation. Next slide, please. All right, so I hope this will be a little bit easier exercise than the last one, but my ask of you all right now is to put on your survey author hats and pretend for a minute that you're designing this survey. And you can ask one question. What would that question be? It doesn't have to be perfect. It could be a theme. It could be a concept. But what do you think would be most important or valuable to ask customers about the clean energy transformation as it relates to our integrated system plan? I won't promise you today that we'll take all these questions and you'll see them in the survey. We're going to ask the same question of the EAG here in about a week. And then we're going to take all of those ideas as well as our own internal ideas and craft this survey, again, to go out later this year, probably in the late November, early December timeframe. So Sophie, I'll pause there for questions and then you can walk them through how to use them.
Sure. So questions for Ray on the, who, what, where, when, and why of this kind of more rigorous survey. Yeah, Joel, please.
Thanks. I think this sounds like a great effort to try and get better customer kind of preferences for what they want to see in the sort of transition we're going through. The items listed on the survey goals, some of them I have some reservations about, like because I feel like at least if I were designing the survey, putting myself in that space, I would want to make sure that the answers I'm getting are things that are actionable. And if the question is about, how much do customers want to pay more on their bills, basically, or some kind of proxy for that kind of question, I think we can all guess what the answer is going to be. If there's a specific kind of utility scale resource that certain customers don't particularly like, I'm not sure what PSE does with that information. But if it's about what programs they're interested in participating in, or other things that maybe I'm not thinking about that are kind of actionable things that you can direct the route of the company's direction, I think those are the things that I would focus on if I were conducting this survey. Partly because it seems like that's the most useful to PSE, but also because I wouldn't want a survey to go out and people say, hey, we don't like high electric bills, and then the next general rate case gets filed and they see that, oh, they clearly didn't take my advice, that there's not that kind of feedback and chilling effect on potential future surveys as well.
Thank you, Joel. That's really helpful. And we're working with a survey firm to help us craft the questions. And our goal is to tease out those themes a little bit more without being super direct. Do you want to pay more on your bill? That's not the question we want to ask, right? I agree with you. We know what the answer to that question is for by and large most customers. But we want to try to tease out the nuances in customer interests and preferences to the degree that we can.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Ray. Yeah, and important question, Joel. Any other thoughts on kind of the objectives of this survey before I'm gonna try to really draw out some thoughts from you? Okay. All right. Well, you should have access. We see visiting bees, seahorses, sharks, multiple sharks. What kind of questions would help you do your work as an advisory group member? What would help you? And I'm happy to do the typing if you're not a multi-screen individual, but you can also just type yourself. What kinds of questions would you like a statistically valid survey to answer so that you can do your advisory work with a little bit more knowledge about what the customer sentiments? I might have to start calling on people. Let's see, someone who hasn't spoken.
Hey, Sophie.
Yeah.
One more addition. I guess one thing I would say is maybe what do you think you know about customers' wants and needs, but lack the evidence to support it, is another way to think about this.
Yeah. What assumptions might you have that could be tested through this survey? I'm seeing some come up here. Let's see. Thank you for typing in the chat.
Oh no, I just saw one disappear. So
I know. I think it's a edit. It's a rewrite. These visiting sharks and their edits. And again, if you're a verbal person, just speak up and I'm in here so I can type for you. So one is, what is the best way for PSE to communicate with you about the need to reduce demand? So kind of a communication question there. See others popping up. So how important is it for PSE to reduce carbon emissions? What information do you need to make a decision about whether to participate in PSE customer programs? So very customer focused, this is helpful. About communication, about information, relative importance. What are your concerns about your utility's future? I see a question about nuclear coming up, which has been something that I've really enjoyed the back and forth on over the years here. What kind of energy resources do you value in your area as opposed to located elsewhere? It gives an interesting kind of spatial dynamic to that question. Are you more comfortable with nuclear energy as a response to climate concerns? Why would you or why would you not participate in PSE energy efficiency programs? So a number of things about energy efficiency programs. This is interesting. Questions about values, questions about concerns. Barriers, my favorite question. What barriers do you face in participating in PSE programs? Thank you all. This is a really rich list. Hopefully this is making your job a little easier, Ray. And how can you overcome those barriers? What do you value about your utility? So those kind of broad questions, I'm seeing kind of a funnel here, some really broad questions about concerns and values all the way down to barriers to specific programs. There's some about energy sources, nuclear energy and energy resources. Any other questions having to do with energy resources or sources? Seeing some other. Seeing some more edits here. I can tell some of you have worked on polls before. You're writing these like it's those little Likert scales I see. So what is the likelihood that you would participate in an energy, in an electrification program in the next year for current gas customers? So some interesting segmenting maybe of questions. I'll give everyone another minute or so. I feel like with each question, it sparks something else for someone else. So a question here for me about rebates. So how important are rebates or incentives in your decision to purchase new equipment? These are all really good customer facing questions. Do you need, let's see. And then what information do you need about clean energy choices? So another question that gets at information. Well, we have two squares left, and the part of me that's competitive is like, oh, I wanna get those last two squares, but I'm not gonna push it unnecessarily if there's something else having to do with assumptions you want to test, questions that would help you do your job better as an advisory group member. Someone's adding a new sticky note there. I'm just gonna quickly see how we're doing on time. Give me a sec. Good, we have another 5 minutes or so. And I should note that if you have a revelation while walking your dog, the ISP email is up and running and you can obviously add to it there. So let's see. Give everyone another minute here. The suspense. Ooh, the open-ended question, what is missing in the clean energy conversation? Is there any information you need to make an informed decision about your participation in programs? Again, really drilling down to barriers in programs and information and communication, trying to understand that and how that works across different customer segments. Okay, well, Ray, this was designed to kind of get the juices running. Do you have any kind of follow-up questions that you have before maybe we'll allow people to do a little bit more speaking rather than typing?
No question, Sophie, following along. This is really great. Thank you all for just taking a little bit of time and sharing your ideas. And we'll share more. Again, we talked to the AG in about a week, and we'll share more about the survey as we move it forward. But really appreciate your suggestions and ideas.
Yeah. So now that you all have written down, but you're all incognito, does someone want to verbally expand on something they wrote here, provide a little bit more context or nuance before we move on? Okay, well, I have a lot of respect. I see maybe someone's trying to write again. I'll make this editable. Okay. A lot of respect for people that do statistically valid polls. Not easy. Joel, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that one of the things that I thought could come from this survey is a better understanding, especially when you're getting statistically significant data from the groups you're targeting, is what barriers they're facing. I think Sophie, you read a few that I contributed to, and how to cater the programs that PSE offers to those groups. So that's all.
Thanks, Joel. Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, Ray, if it works for you, I was thinking I could show the results that the RPAG members of the 8 RPAG members in their response, recognizing that other RPAG members can fill out the poll at a later date. Does it work for you, Ray, just to put that on the screen and have that lead into the conversation with Philip and others?
Sounds great, Sophie. Thank you.
Thank you. So you're watching us do some on-the-fly work here. And I appreciate you working with us. So here are let me zoom in. So identify the topics that your organization are most important for the RPAG. And we had a max of 3, which I think was very hard for many of you, but decarbonization was the top at 4. And then we had a few with 3 votes. So electrification, equitable distribution of benefits, initial planning assumptions were kind of the next 3 on that list. I'll just note what got zeros, because sometimes it's interesting. Portfolio sensitivities, gas resource planning, and conservation potential assessment. I want to recognize that not all the RPAG members are here, so this is not a broad representation of the beliefs of the group, but it's a start for the conversation, and we know Meredith will follow up. Then identifying a topic that would be eliminated. There was no, clear winner here, but the ones that got 2 is load forecast after demand side resources, DSR, and portfolio sensitivities. 2 folks wanted. So just to get some thoughts going about what you all have been observing, and PSE will also take into account what members of the public were sharing, but we won't focus on that right now. So actually, before we jump off, is there an issue? Does someone accidentally click something that didn't come through? Someone can come off of mute if they feel like there's something that didn't come through correctly. Okay.
Yeah, it didn't look like my surveys were incorporated, because as you might expect, I did select gas resource planning. So it surprised me to see that there were 0 people that selected that, unless well, yeah, I selected gas resource planning and it didn't show up. So as one of my three.
Yeah, I'm curious if maybe there was a click the public link instead of this one. But we'll this is not the end all be all. But yeah,
That's
Lauren,
fine.
go ahead.
Thanks, Sophie. I just wanted to say, so for the second question, I selected customer benefit indicators, and it's really just because I think that is better handled through a different group, potentially through the equity advisory group, in coordination with some of the interested parties that work more specifically on CBIs. I don't know that the RPAG needs to have a whole meeting on CBIs. So that was, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context around that.
Okay, thanks for that. Anybody else want to put some context to their selection? Joel, go ahead.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, not on my specific selection, but I think maybe to the point that was made earlier about the options that we have and the options we don't have in the survey. I guess, and this is some feedback that we shared after one of the previous RPAG meetings where we were discussing ways that the RPAG wanted to engage in the ISP process. And I think that one of the benefits, at least that I see in a shift toward a more integrated system plan, is the connections now that are more strongly drawn between the gas and electric side and between the resource planning versus delivery system planning and down to the distribution level side. And so I think the framing of a lot of the options in the survey, we're using, gas resource planning and electric resource planning as two different things, and resource planning and distribution planning as two different things. And I think one thing I'm interested in knowing more about is how PSE is starting to break down some of these older silos to actually get to a more integrated system where things are optimized through the energy system as opposed to just thinking about gas and electric as separate, and as also throughout the distribution system, transmission system, resource planning, and how all those things are connected. So that was one thing here.
Yeah, thanks for that, Joel. I think Laura, Philip, do you want to respond?
Well, I think that I'll just share that one of the ways that we've been thinking about these things, Joel, is that there still is, right? I mean, there's somebody out there saying they have software that can integrate all this stuff magically, and Shazam, it gives you the right answer. We've kind of we've talked to those folks, and there's no way we have time to for the whole company to ship out all of our planning softwares to a new vendor that may or may not work. So that's something we can look at later. But even in the next ISP process, but really, there are things, the way we've been thinking about it is there are things that you can do in the, let's say, the electric portfolio analysis that really don't affect the delivery system at all, right? If I'm going to have a wind farm in Eastern Washington or a solar farm in Eastern Washington or a hybrid resource over in Eastern Washington, that doesn't necessarily change much on the distribution system at all. So, and similarly, do we need a new substation, or do you reinforce the areas with lines instead of a substation? Things like that. They'll need to look at. There's different ways they can achieve the same objective. There's different ways that the supply portfolio can achieve that, resource adequacy and renewable solution that don't affect each other. And so if that helps, that's one of the things we've been thinking of when we said we meant by portfolio sensitivity is a lot of different ways to get the energy to our system. And we can examine those without having to get bogged down. I mean, it doesn't actually change the delivery story at all. So I don't know if that kind of context helps.
Philip, I just want to let Dan speak because I know he has to leave now-ish. So Dan, let's hear from you real quick.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm sorry I have to bounce. My own board is meeting here right now. So appreciate it. I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on what Joel said, and I appreciate your explanation, Philip, and I get it. But the one thing I was looking at that whole list is in the context of integrated system planning, what are the implications for consumers on both sides of the aisle, right? So as you make a resource decision on the electric side, or a distribution planning decision on the gas side, what are the implications on the electric side? And I didn't really see that in the list, but that was something that was of particular interest to me. And I don't know, Joel, if I'm accurately characterizing what you were trying to get at, but that's the thought that I prompted for me.
I think that is, yeah, certainly part of what I was trying to get at is the interconnections between the two utilities, and also again the sort of levels of the utility scale resources all the way down to customers and everything in between. Philip, I appreciate your response, and I understand that there are practical modeling limitations. There are schools that are going to do this perfectly right now, and they're not that I'm aware of. Hopefully you all are doing good research in that area too. But wanted to highlight that and just say that that's a topic that even if, we can't get it perfect in the first ISP on a, an abbreviated timeline, wanted to recognize that that's a topic that hopefully you all are thinking about, and maybe we can discuss in the RPAG is where the connections, where we can make those connections sooner rather than later, and which ones necessarily have to in future iterations.
Yeah, no, that's great. That dialogue was great for me, just in terms of understanding. My kind of takeaway from that is that we need to make sure that we're talking about the connections between all of these different pieces. How are they connected and how are they flowing? That kind of process related question, which we've spent a year pounding our heads against the wall trying to figure out how to make these a completely different set of connections between all these functions. So it is not simple to follow, right? We've been working on it a long time. So I that's kind of my takeaway is, and we can certainly focus on that. I think you're right. That's really important to understand how all of these pieces come together to be an integrated system plan. That was a really helpful discussion.
Great. Very good. Lauren, I still see your hand. Maybe it's just a remnant from before, perhaps. There we go, it's down. So looking at the time here, I want to make sure we have our 10 minutes for public comment. So Will, can I ask you to put the slide deck back up? And then I know Philip and Jen are going to talk through kind of the timeline and if they have any preliminary insights based off of what our RPAG members sent. And just for the group to know, we asked Dan to fill out the RPAG version of that poll so that his points of view are reflected. So it should be a more comprehensive soon. So Jen, Philip, take us away from here.
Okay, sorry, my computer gave me like a blue screen and turned off, of course. So I can see the computer, but I can't turn my camera on. I went through the results, recognizing they're not complete. And just wanted to iterate on the next slide when we look at this timeline, and as we think through the prioritization between now and July, is it on the next screen? It didn't turn. Or next slide, I just see the, yep. Okay, there we go. Yeah. Okay, so as we look at this timeline, the star is kind of where we're at today. You can see that the commission rulemaking concludes end of Q2 of 2025. And you can see there's a lot going on between that commission rulemaking process and the development of this ISP. And a lot of the feedback that was provided in that poll, and then I'm hoping for additional clarification and expectations from you guys via feedback report on these items, but just thought worth noting, decarbonization scored really high on the RPAG and then was also of interest in the public results as well. And so that would be really an input assumption piece. So on the
left half of the screen as we're updating inputs and assumptions and modeling changes as needed within that first piece of the work here. That would fall there, but then it also come back on the back end once we have draft results. So let me actually take a step back for 1 second. So between Q3 and Q2 of 2025, we have a lot of work happening. We have ISP scope, assumptions, inputs, scenarios being developed. We have the CPA and load forecasting getting updated. We have the development of the customer plan. We have the electric portfolio. So that's the traditional electric IRP model that you're familiar with. We'd be updating some of the inputs. Like we mentioned, we're really trying to leverage as much of 25 as we can, but there will be updates made. And there's also gas portfolio as well for the integrated resource plan inputs updates. And then if there needs to be model changes for whatever reason, that would all have to happen within that time period. There's also gas and electric T&D input building at that time period. So this is really where we see the inputs and assumptions being built and refined. So that the things that scored high from a engagement perspective on that survey were decarbonization, electrification, equity, and planning assumptions, which fit nicely in that window. But we have a breadth of content and technical areas that we could deep dive into for each one of those. So more clarity and context as you think more about this and your feedback is really helpful for us to prioritize those conversations, because that's a lot to occur within that time period. Once we get those rulemaking process, we actually have a concurrent deadline for inputs closing, because we have to start running the portfolio analysis, benchmarking those different inputs and producing some results. And you can see as we get further to the right in Q2 of 26 and Q3, we're really talking about those draft results on the portfolio and trying to push that up in the timeline from prior engagements. That's a really helpful context to have something to talk through with you. And that also scored high on the results, both from the public and the RPAG on draft results and being able to make edits to those results based on the output. I'll stop there. I can't see the chat. I think my computer's back on. Let me log in.
Jen, way to, rock that slide without having the tech you usually need. So let's hear from Ezra. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm very impressed. And there's a lot going on here, but I think one concern that was voiced by a number of people, certainly by public counsel, about moving toward this ISP process is that it's pushing stuff back, and there's this looming 2030 carbon neutrality deadline, which is still the law in Washington. And it's just, I think, a lot of people chose decarbonization, and maybe had they had an option, they would have said, how is PSE going to meet carbon neutrality in 2030? And then zero carbon in, the escaping whether it's 2040 or 2045, embarrassingly. But anyway, especially the 2030 goal, which looms very large in this process. So I'm curious how concurrently with this, PSE is going to be able to show that it has a feasible, affordable plan for meeting that goal, which will then be incorporated into the IRP. Because, if we're not evaluating things, I don't know, it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of time if that's not a concurrent process.
Yeah. Kara, I see you come off of mute. Any thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Ezra. As most of you or all of you know, I really appreciate that question and observation, because we're not filing a 2025 CEIP anymore. We're pivoting to this ISP, and so I think it is going to be important in this ISP not only for us to reflect on and demonstrate the progress we've made pretty close to the date of filing. I won't say January 1, but through mid 2026 or somewhere in there, and also be projecting going forward how we get to that carbon neutrality standard by 2030. And so, I think all those components of what you'd have in a CEIP need to be reflected in this plan. And I certainly can appreciate your sense of urgency of we need to see that in this ISP conversation. So I think that regardless of which box we put that in, that has to be an important component of the ISP, because none of those CETA requirements went away. This project just the lens got bigger from our perspective. So I hope that helps.
Thanks for that, Kara. I see Don's hand. Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, I just want to say one of the things that I've been most excited about in today's presentation is just the focus on customer needs early in the process. I think that's great, but just a bit of caution there. It's also sort of aspirational or theoretical from a resource planning perspective. There is so much that needs to be done practically at the back end. And I know as a PSE customer, there are questions and desires that I have that just, that would be helpful for our energy future that just are hard to find answers for, or it's slower than one would expect. So anyway, I just think that it's good to keep in mind with these efforts that there's a lot of dependency on a good implementation by other groups than the resource planners, and I'm rooting for it. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Don. Any other responses or thoughts from PSE before we move into next steps? Philip, did you want to elaborate on anything?
I just mentioned that also, Ezra, you may recall we do have an RFP out on the streets right now. So bids are due quite soon. I don't remember exactly what day, but so we did not, we didn't, even though we're not doing a 25 IRP, we still accelerated that RFP. So we are moving forward with that RFP. So there's one thing to say in a theoretical planning document, what are you doing? But the answer to that is we've just issued an RFP that will hopefully be able to close whatever gap remains by 2030.
Thanks, that's really helpful. But then, we need to know about that and know what's happening with it, in terms of understanding that context. But thank you, Philip.
Yeah, that's good feedback. We'll see what we can do to help clarify all that.
Good. All right. Anything else on the preliminary ISP schedule? No. Okay, well, we can move into some next steps and then turn over to public comment. So thank you. Next slide. So the feedback form closes in 2 weeks, I believe. Some bonus time here. As we mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, there's that comprehensive look at the 2025 process, and that was something that PSE wanted you to look at, in addition to if there's anything else that comes to mind as a result of today's meetings. Dates are TBD for public webinars and the RPAG meeting. Like Ray mentioned in the beginning, there'll be some doodle polls coming out, so to really maximize participation by RPAG members. October 31st is PSE is filing the engagement plan. You kind of saw some initial thinking about it now. That feedback form could be a place for you to elaborate on some of your thoughts. There will be a RPAG meeting again in November, date TBD, as well as December. So you're getting the sense RPAG, there'll be a bit of a regular cadence here, and hoping to bring a public webinar to life in November as well. Once again, note the new email address. So I would, do the thing where you delete irp@pse.com from whatever email browser you have, use the correct one. And I think those are the next steps. So next slide, please. We're going to turn over to public comment. So Emily, can you work your magic and allow the hand raising feature to occur? And I'll take a look at who has their hand raised in a moment. Let me turn also to my 2-minute timer. All right, Emily, is everything looking okay on the hand raising front? I'm not seeing anyone quite yet. Emily, can you give me the thumbs up if all the settings are correct? Because it's possible that no one's feeling chatty.
It looks good on my end, not seeing any hands raised.
Okay, we'll give everyone another minute or so here to see if anyone has a strike of inspiration. I'll check my email real quick too to see if there's something wonky. If someone was trying to message me. Nope. Could be that it's just a quiet day for the members of the public who are here. Oh, we do have a hand. There we go. They're coming in. Okay, the first one I saw was from Thomas Kramer. Go ahead. I'm gonna allow to talk. Go ahead, Thomas.
I just unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you great.
Okay, great. The raised hand just came up. It's great to see that PSE is taking the initiative to begin planning for the gas and electric system integration even before the final regulations are completed by the UTC. However, the planning outlined today doesn't seem to adequately address integrating the two utilities to achieve the goals of the Combined Utility Decarbonization Act, aka HB 1589. The scenarios and goal development should specifically include ultimate gas phase out to meet the intent of the act, which is, and I quote, to transition customers off of the direct use of fossil fuels. Direct use of fossil fuels means gas. The transition off gas must be closely coordinated with plans for electrification of heating demand. This is at the core of why the two utilities are required to integrate under this new decarbonization law. Planning should reflect how the electricity system will gradually take over reliable supply of customers' heating needs from the gas system. On a related point, the long list of new planning requirements that are in Section 3 of the Act requires a greater level of detail in the ISP than was previously needed in IRPs for the separate utilities. Planning must go beyond the focus on generic and readily available resources formerly used in IRPs, particularly for the gas system. Such things as ranking all gas pipeline segments for their suitability for non-pipeline alternatives, and among a host of other requirements are something that is required now. And I'm out of time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for those comments. We appreciate that. Next, we see Jim Adcock has his hand raised. Let's promote and allow you to speak as well.
Yeah, Sophie, I just want to spend a second up front to express my concerns, the same concerns the previous talk talked about, which is the raise hand feature did not show up. And as such, I don't feel that was fair. James,
I'm sorry. Yeah,
that's a technology problem, but you always have technology problems. You really have to treat the public fair.
Absolutely. And that was a tech glitch, and I stalled just so that we could be able to fix it. And I'm really glad that we get to hear from you now. So with that in mind, your 2 minutes begin.
Yeah, James Adcock, electrical engineer from MIT graduate. I've been a dozen years plus participant in Puget's IRP process. While I don't agree with exclusion of public participation, which is required by law, in any case, RPAG doesn't have enough members. Those members do not represent the range of ratepayer interests. Those ratepayers are not showing up at meetings reliably and are not prepared to actively participate. In summary, PSE does not currently have meaningful public participation in the IRP process as required by law. This needs to be fixed and is both a Puget and UTC responsibility to do so. Secondly, Puget in this power presentation, as Azra mentioned, continues to ignore the CETA requirement to be 80% actually clean power by 2030. I continue to be greatly concerned that Puget is not making real actual progress to get there. And the fact that Puget continues to ignore this requirement in their presentations reinforces these concerns. 3, Puget already had a great RFP process in the last couple years, but then Puget simply didn't follow through on those RFP proposals, which again reinforces my concerns about the 2030 requirements. In summary, Puget is not playing fair. I ask again that Puget play fair, act honestly, not needlessly and excessively pollute, and not needlessly and excessively waste ratepayer money. Thank you, Jim Adcock.
Thanks for that, Jim, for those comments there. I'll look around to see if anyone else has a raised hand. And I'm not seeing any at the moment. All right. Well, with that, we're just a couple minutes before the noon hour. And so I just want to thank everyone for regathering and launching the 2027 ISP process, kind of the season 2 of the work that you've been doing and that you put in already as RPAG members. We know we have some follow-up on the PSE side, getting that survey out to more folks, following up on some of the questions that were posed in the feedback form. And I hope you all take a minute with your colleagues and provide any additional reflections or thoughts in writing ahead of your next meeting. Stay tuned for that doodle poll so that we can get a time that really maximizes participation. And just truly thank you for kicking off the fall and kicking off the ISP process with all the input you did provide today and thoughts on the survey and important topics and otherwise. So everyone enjoy your lunch, and thank you to PSE presenters and the participants today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, everyone.